Jungle.
Welcome everyone to this live Q&A session. This is the first of a series of webinars around role mining. This first webinar is really an introductory session about this topic. It's intended to be interactive. In GoToWebinar, you have a questions section where you can enter your questions, any type of question about to role mining and to discover together what role mining entails, what are the pros and cons, what are the best practices, what are the various technologies that can be used to perform role mining. Any question is welcome. And after first a short PPT presentation, I will jump to browsing your questions and asking Sebastian to provide the best advice. Ready? Let's go.
Go.
So Brainwave is a French software vendor. We're specialized in identity analytics, which actually entails role mining and also access inventory, access control automation, user access reviews, that sort of services. You can review our 5-star reviews on the Gartner Peer Insight website. And we have very nice customer references around the world. Let's jump into the topic. So you all know that when a user comes to an organization, you have to grant him or her access rights for him to be able to perform his job. So, but directly managing authorizations is a complex task. And it just comes down to the fact that there are a lot of access rights, a lot of authorizations to be managed for each user. It's kind of an exponential rule of thumb. One user, 10 accounts, and each account 10 or maybe sometimes 100 of authorizations that need to be managed. So if you manage those authorizations independently, individually, directly, what we also call discretionary, it will require a lot of actions, and those actions can lead to a lot of errors. The goal with the introduction of roles is to simplify those management actions, and simply put, the role will regroup a number of authorizations, and instead of granting individually each access rights, you would grant the role to the user, and then this will automatically embark all the subsequent authorizations. So obviously, this approach has a lot of advantages. First one is to improve the user experience, especially manipulating far less number of roles than numbers of permissions, and also having a more relevant information in the sense that the role can carry a business meaning relevance that is not truly the case with individual authorizations, which are usually bore by technical permissions that business people don't understand. Secondly, you can help improve security because somehow the way to design roles is a way to streamline and standardize what access each user will receive through the same role. And finally, it's also a way to simplify compliance, and especially by leveraging a very interesting consideration, which is that you can separate the review of the role assignments to users and the review of the role content itself. So the authorizations and the permissions on one side, and the group of users on the other side, and this really reduces the overall complexity of the review. What is a role? A role is not is a complex object. Actually, it has a number of characteristics. You describe a role as multiple versions because it lives and it lives and it can evolve over time. You can define a scope of applicability for the role. You usually would also prefer designing an owner for the role who owns the role. But most and foremost, it contains two sets of objects, or it relates two sets of objects. It relates a list of people with a list of permissions. People are usually forget to consider that the scope of users is part of the definition of the role. The role is applicable to a certain user population that you need to define. That's what I mean. And of course, it also applies to a list of permissions for applications, for unstructured data, for infrastructure components, etc. So, can we do role modeling by hand? And by hand, I mean taking, encompassing the whole full list of users who have access to different IT assets, then considering the full list of assets themselves, application assets, infrastructure assets, data assets, and trying to do the grouping of permissions per user populations. If you do it manually, that usually means that you will use the most famous tool on earth, which is MS Excel, obviously. And you'll probably try to do a pivot table where on one axis you will have the people grouped by job title, grouped by organization, and on the other axis you'll have the applications grouped by application areas and maybe organizations as well, or technologies, what else, and assign the roles or the profiles at the intersection of each column and row. And you will end up with something that is obviously plainly totally unmanageable. The reason is basically that the volume of information that needs to be analyzed is just too important to be managed manually. Also, again, the fact that the technical permissions are difficult to understand and interpret for business users. You need a business level understanding of those authorizations. And finally, using Excel is very difficult to regroup together what makes sense to be packaged together to build the roles. So manually, you come up with a very a very painful exercise that lasts a very long time and does not yield very satisfying results. The previous example I've shown you is a sanitized capture of an actual role mining matrix built by a customer of ours before he acquired Brainwave. It took them 2 years to build this spreadsheet, and unfortunately, it was never used just because obviously after 2 years there have been so many changes in the organizational structure, in the application landscape, that whatever roles they achieved to build in this matrix were irrelevant at the time the matrix was published. So let's dive into another approach, which is the Brainwave role mining methodology. So what we say at Brainwave is that in order to have an efficient role mining approach that will meet the previous concerns about the volume of data, but also the speed of building those roles and the the interactivity with business users, you need to have a two-sided approach, the top-down approach and the bottom-up approach combined in one methodology. The top-down approach is basically having workshops with all your stakeholders, and especially the business people, who can explain what each individual needs in terms of authorizations in order to do his or her job, classify and extract the relevant roles based on clusters that are found by the bottom-up approach, which is software-aided components, which will, by ways of algorithm, identify the access rights that are given to users and build clusters of relevant group together authorizations. Combining those two approaches together makes sure that the rules that are built by the algorithm are indeed relevant to the business, and also sometimes help complete what can be automatically found via the algorithm with information that are coming from the business people that are not observed directly from the data. If I try to summarize the main features that anyone would like out of such a software-aided method, I would summarize it in 4 bullet points. First, the methodology should be natively integrated within the tool. So it's not having a tool on one side that does automatically things and having a consultant lead workshops on the other side. It's a completely intricated methodology within the software tool. This is also important to be able to lead a step-by-step role design and approval. Second thing, this service should be put in place as quickly and as thoughtlessly as possible, in the sense that one would not stand to have a 6-month integration project before being able to have the first roles being designed. So it has to be very quick, it has to be very straightforward without any specific technical prerequisites. Third, it should allow to be able to work collaboratively, and especially because one has to put around the table very diverse populations, the business teams, the IT teams, application owners, etc., that have to talk together to discuss the relevantness of roles, understand what are the underlying technical authorizations or permissions, and come up with a compromise that creates, that enables the construction of this business role model. And finally, the ability to design roles, assess their relevance, and implement them in production incrementally. And especially because it can be a tedious process, you have to be able to demonstrate very rapid results and show some ROI to the approach, but also because things change. We are talking about a live organism where the people move, are transferred, there's some turnover, the organization itself is being changed every year, and also the application and IT environment is also evolving over time. So roles are not static things that you design once and for all. You need an approach that will help you identify the gaps and tune the design of roles over time very simply. So this will all be soon a reality. Stay tuned. I will come back to this later with the next webinar sessions. But for now, without further ado, I will jump to your questions. So just a quick reminder, as I previously mentioned, you have a questions section in the GoToWebinar interface. You can enter your questions here. We'll be able to read them and present those questions to Sebastian, who will shortly start to answer them. Just a quick word about the next sessions. before we jump to the first questions that are coming up. Next webinar will be on February 3rd, 11:30 a.m. It will be focused on the role mining methodology. So I explained the bottom-up and top-down approach very quickly in just one slide. In this next session, we'll take some more time to explain the methodology, its main steps, and the benefits you can get from it. And the final webinar session will be on February 17th, same time, and it will be a demo of the Brainwave service. So I'll see we have first few questions. Yes, they are coming up. Okay. So Sebastian, are you ready?
Yeah, ready to go.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So I will try to regroup the questions per theme. Okay, we'll start with questions about what are roles and those things. I have a question about we hear about concepts such as business roles versus application roles. Can you tell us a little more about those?
Sure. So it's a fairly common concept actually. The idea, whenever you want to build a role, you end up in a situation where you start by somehow modeling role at an application level. If we take a little step back, just imagine that those roles are the equivalent of, let's say, some given task, such as issuing payments in an ERP system, for instance. So at some point, you start by consolidating all those fine-grained permission into relevant, let's say, application role. One role equals one task, and those roles are named application role. Those roles are built at an application level, which means that those role only contains actually permission for a given application. And at the end of the day, when you're granting an application role, you're granting, let's say, the right to do or to issue a task at an application level, such as validating a payment, creating a new payment, for instance. You can stop at this level, and actually it already provides some benefits because you're already reducing actually the burden of managing the access rights by running a role at an application level. But what you can do as well is that you can move a step further, and you can also build role at what is called the business level. And those roles are very different because then you're no longer modeling a task per task activity through those role, but you're really modeling, let's say, the job function of those people. So those are called business role. So through a business role, for instance, you can build a business role called accountant. And within the accountant role, what you will grab actually are all those permissions that are needed for an accountant in order to perform its day-to-day duties. Most of the time, actually, those roles are nested. I mean by that within a business role, what you will find is a series of application role. Okay, so at the end of the day, when you're consolidating role or when you're mining or building role, you'll start with role at an application level, and then you consolidate those role at the business level in order to build somehow those business role task, those business role basically.
Okay, very interesting. I have another question about roles and how to use them. Do you have to regroup all authorizations and assign them through roles?
A good question. So I mean, when you're running or when you're starting a role mining or role modeling initiative, of course, this is a goal that you could imagine. This is actually a very bad idea, and the reason for this is because actually primarily the role actually is to help you to improve your operational efficiency by reducing the amount of operations that you have to perform in order to grant privileges to the end user. And when you're starting modeling role, you quickly end up with some kind of a Pareto situation. I mean by that, with a few roles, you can actually reduce 80% of the permission granted to the user through those few roles. But when you want to reach the 100% coverage, then it's some kind of, let's say, unreachable goal. Because you end up with, let's say, one discrete permission per user. And you can even end up in a very absurd situation where you can end up with more role than user, actually. So you can end up in a situation where it's more complex to manage your access rights through role than managing access right at a discretionary level. So it's a good practice, actually, to have a mix on especially as well by mixing role at an application level and at a business level, in order at the end of the day to be efficient and to stay efficient. And staying efficient means having to manage on a day-to-day basis a reduced number of business roles.
Okay, I have one last question about the content of roles, I guess, before we jump into questions about the methodology. How can we mine roles in AD? I guess Active Directory, right?
Okay, Active Directory. Okay. This one is a good question. It's every time that you're running role mining, actually you're running role mining against Active Directory. You know, as a matter of fact, Active Directory is the main pillar for your IT security infrastructure. Within Active Directory, you will find all the primary accounts for those, for all of your users, on tons of groups as well. As a rule of thumb, let's say for a 1,000 people company, you will end up with 2,000 Active Directory accounts on 4,000 Active Directory groups. Most of the time, those groups actually embed or grant privileges. So for instance, they're granting privileges in terms of shared folders, SharePoint access, or even application access. So you end up by running actually role mining at a group level. Keep in mind, nevertheless, that not groups are relevant in order to perform role mining operation, because most of the time those groups actually are nested. And you should only run role mining at some kind of, let's say, of a direct account group assignation level in order to somehow reduce the number of, let's say, the breadth of your analysis. And of course, in order to stay in a situation where somehow the result or the outcome of your role mining operation will be actionable. So actually, you will end up by saying, okay, I want to attach this account to this group, but not to those subgroups, which are actually fine-grained permission.
I have first question I have here is what prerequisites we have to bear in mind when starting a role mining initiative, and how long does it take to have suitable roles?
So prerequisites. So actually, as we have seen in the Excel spreadsheet that you shared at the beginning of your presentation, running role mining ends up by somehow building what we can call the access chain. So basically, who can access to what in the company. So on one hand, those people, along with their organization, job function, situation, whether they're internal people or contractor, for instance, and on the other hand, all their accounts and access rights or application profile. And you need to have this information, and actually the outcome of your role mining operation depends on the quality of this data set, actually. So let's imagine that you are in a situation where, let's say, for something like 30% of the Active Directory accounts, you do not know who are the account owner. You do not know actually, or you cannot identify or spot the contractors in your systems. Or perhaps as well, you have tons of unused accounts, or perhaps even leavers accounts still active. At the end of the day, you won't be able to run actually a role mining operation in a good situation, in a good position. So long story short, it means that even though it's not a super cool initiative, you need to start with data quality. Data quality is at stake when you're running role mining operation. Really, you need to start with data quality. You need to clean up your repositories. You need to somehow reconcile all those accounts with those people. You need to grab all the characteristics of those people as well, whether they're contractors or running in the company. So the information such as the organization, the job function, for instance. So you need to have those information in your hand. So that's the first point. The other point is, and especially when you're running role mining against legacy application, most of the time you end up with cryptic permissions. So I mean by that, those fine-grained permission at the end of the day, actually nobody knows. I mean, nobody knows what are the meaning or what you can do through those permission. So, and this is especially true for the mainframes. This is especially true as well for Active Directory, most of the time for the groups. And if you do not want to end up with actually workshop where you need to enroll all the application owner every time that you're running a workshop, you need to start with documenting those permissions on those groups as well. So this is very important. And by the way, perhaps by through this documentation process, you will end up by performing some cleanups as well, which will help you as well to somehow accelerate the momentum in terms of building relevant role at an application level as well. So this is a side effect that you have by documenting those permissions groups as well. So starting by documenting. So regarding the other question.
Does it take? Yes. How
Yeah,
long does
how
it
long
take
does
to
it
have
take?
suitable?
So it depends. I mean, it can take years really to build role for a big or a huge organization, and this is a bad idea actually to take years to build roles, because and especially at the business level, those roles are very are aligned actually with the business activities of the company. And you know what? On a yearly basis, the organization of the company is evolving. So I mean by that, you have version in your role, and your role are evolving because your roles, and especially the business role, actually, their goal is to be aligned with the company strategy. So having said that, it means that when you're running role mining and when you're building role, you need to somehow adopt some kind of an agile and iterative approach. So starting by building those coarse-grained, very large role, I mean the Pareto principle, in order to cover in a very short time frame at least 80% of your perimeters, okay, reducing the pain of managing the access rights. And perhaps that if you have time, then you can enter into some more fine-grained, let's say, analysis. But keeping in mind that roles are like puppies at the end of the day. Once you have one, you need to take care of it. Okay, you need to care for it. So that's the idea. So you really need to have this iterative approach, and you need to build role in a reduced time frame. So at the end of the day, on if you have actually the right tools and the right methodology, you can build role within let's say within a quarters. You can build the relevant roles for a company, whatever its size. That's the idea. That's the goal.
Okay. Okay, 1 quarter. I have, unfortunately, you've been very talkative, and we're running
Oh,
out of time. So I will try to, and apologies for the people who ask over questions to slightly related topics. I will just say one last question, which is related to um, identity and access management systems. So I have. Once you've designed your role model, how do you use them? How do you integrate them in access management systems, and also my IAM system provides a role mining function. What's the difference?
Okay. Okay, so 2 questions here. So I try to be short on this one. So for the first one, actually, what you have to do is to avoid the big bang effects. So actually, you know, building your role, and let's say on day one, performing some kind of a reset of all your permission company-wide in order to realign all the permission with the role. Because you will end up with tons of situations where actually at the end of the day, you will remove access to people, and people will be no longer able to perform their job. So it's very difficult actually to enforce a role with a big bang approach. So what is preferred actually is to have another approach, which is an agile approach, an iterative approach, where you say, okay, once my role model is published, the next access request will be through this role. Okay, so let's say that starting 1st of February, all the access requests will be role-based. Okay, but I won't remove actually the legacy access. So the legacy access will remain. And the idea actually is that I will clean up those legacy access through all my control framework. And the pillar for this is access certification or access review. So the idea is that then on a monthly or quarterly basis through access reviews, I will provide a view of the situation for the line manager or the application owner at a role level, and I will highlight all those access that are still, let's say, at a discretionary level in order to perform the cleanup at let's say at a local level. So then actually, so you can actually import this role in an identity and access management system, and actually whatever the identity and access management system, it's quite easy to import a role model in the identity and access management system, and some actually identity and access management system also embed role mining. And formally, this is role mining. This is not role modeling. So this is some kind of an automated tool in order to automatically identify what we can call role or cluster of permission in the company. This is a bad idea, actually. It's because when you're building a role, at the end of the day, you need to care for it. So you need to have a role owner, and you need to have relevant information attached to the role. When you're running role only, or when you're building role only through algorithm, you end up with irrelevant role. I mean by that, roles that are not relevant at a business level. So nobody understands actually what are the content of the role, and who is the owner of the role. So it's a very bad idea to run this algorithm. Most of the identity and access management system have adopted this approach. And this is basically because they, at the end of the day, they only wanted to tick somehow the case, in order to fulfill an analyst requirement. So you need to provide role mining. But this is a bad idea and a bad approach overall.
Okay, I think we've reached the end of this session. So I displayed again the calendar for our next webinar sessions, February 3rd, February 17th. I hope we'll see you on those sessions again. And obviously, if you have other questions, if you want to keep this discussion alive, please feel free to reach out to Brainwave on our website. You will receive shortly a replay link to this webinar session so that you can share it with other colleagues and friends. Thank you very much. Enjoy your day and talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.